Hey Internet, McGee Media coming at you with a visual effects tutorial. I'm going to try to jump through this from a beginner standpoint to make this spaceship landing shot as quick as possible, hit all the highlights. So first thing we're going to do is jump over to Motion Array to our footage to get basically our clean plate. So we're going to type in and search for landscapes. So landscapes on any stock footage site. And we're going to come down and search and find the landscape that we use for our shot. So I'm just showing you where I got this information from. So here's the shot that we're working with. We're going to want to download the highest quality version. So they do have a ProRes 422 4K. So download that, save that, and now we have the 3D ship on Production Crate. Click on 3D and then go to the 3D models section and then click on space. This is where we're going to get our free. Click on show free. This shows all the free assets, and then we have this Raven spaceship here. Show you what that looks like. And then again, you want to download the highest quality that your PC can handle. So I'm doing the 4K. They have a 2K and a 1K version. So I'm selecting the 4K and selecting download. And then we're jumping into DaVinci Resolve with our shot. We're cutting our shot so that it's exactly 12 seconds, and we need to export this as a PNG sequence. Anytime we're doing a visual effects shot, we want to export as a PNG sequence. So once you get your shot down to 12 seconds exactly, you want to click over to deliver, and then we need to export this as a PNG sequence. So I'll show you how to do the PNG export. You just need to find a location on your system to save. So I have a VFX folder on my desktop, and I want to go ahead and name this image sequence with the underscore. The underscore after that, when we render, is going to put in each frame as 0001, 0002, and so on. So we change the format to PNG. And then we want to jump over to file, and then this is where we want to use 4 digits in the frame or in the file name, and then it's going to name every frame 0001 all the way through. It's at 24 frames per second, 12 seconds. It's 288 frames, and we want to start with frame 1. And then you're able to add this to your render queue, and it's going to render it out as a PNG. So every single frame is going to be a PNG shot, and we're going to need this to work in Blender and DaVinci Resolve to make our shot, to composite it. Next, we need to tighten up and organize our media in DaVinci Resolve. So if you right click and go to new bin, you're able to add in new bins to keep everything organized. I created one for footage, another one for timeline. So I'm going to do our shot 1 and drag that into the footage bin, and then our timeline 1, I'm going to click that and drag that into our timelines bin. That way we can kind of work and stay organized. We want to add another new bin. So this bin 3 we're going to name as our comps for our composite shots. And then we have to do another one for our camera tracking, which we want to name as image sequence. And then next is where you're going to want to import your image sequence that we just rendered into this file folder here. I was having issues when I was doing the import of the PNG sequence. When I go to the import media, you can see how this is where I saved it to on my VFX desktop folder. So I select every single image from the render that we just did, and it pulls it in as each single picture instead of having it as an image sequence. So the way to fix that is click on Media in DaVinci Resolve, and then you're going to go up to the 3 little dots, and then when you click on the 3 little dots, for the frame display mode, you want sequence. So now when you go back in and you import, it'll import it as this image sequence, and it knows that it's basically a video with frame 1 through frame 288 at 24 frames per second here. So if you're having the issue and it's importing each picture as an individual like you saw up first, this is the workaround to get it as an image sequence. So now we're able to work with it as an image sequence on our timeline for our tracking shot. Next, we need to create a new Fusion composition clip, and for some reason my screen recording software didn't capture this, but if you right click, new Fusion composition, set your composition to 12 seconds, and then you're going to see it, name it as tracking, pop up here. We want to double click on that to bring us into Fusion. Go to our image sequence and bring that in as media 1 to connect that to our media out 1. And here we're going to set up our camera tracker to basically track what this camera movement did in a 3D environment, so then we can import our 3D spaceship in Blender and then kind of do the composition. I'll show you how that works here. So you link up your image sequence to the media out and make sure that it's playing back. You should have 288 frames. When I click on this to make it one single screen, and then make sure that it is tracking properly. Next thing we want to do is essentially get our camera tracker so that we can track this movement as the camera does a slow push in. So you'll hit the shift space and then search for camera tracker. Once you do that, you'll see the camera tracker node pop up that we're going to connect essentially to our media 1 in between and the media out 1. So here we have the camera tracker. Now we have to set up our camera track. And in order to get a good camera track, we need the image to be as still as possible. And what you can see is the trees actually move a little bit. So what we need to do, once we get our camera tracker set up, we can preview the auto track locations by checking on this box and then moving our playhead, and we can see all of our tracking points. And then the next thing we can do is check on this little darken image checkbox that's on our inspector. So options and then darken image, and that'll just kind of show the tracking points a little bit better, a little bit easier for us. So in order to get a good track too, I don't want it to track the trees because the trees are moving, and that's going to give us a bad solve error. So one way to get around that is by telling it not to track any of the points that are on the trees. So you can see, if just kind of scrubbing here and seeing where all the tracking points are going to be, there's a bunch on the tree. So what we need to do is basically create a mask out this tree here, and then tell it not to use any of those points. And what we're going to do is get a polygon node and kind of draw or trace around the tree, so that way it doesn't track any of the points on the tree. So first, we don't want to connect it to the tracker. We just want to click on the polygon and then either start at the beginning or start at the end, and then just kind of draw around the trees. So this is basically saying, hey, this mask, we don't want anything inside of this mask to be tracked, because those leaves moving is going to give us a bad solve error. So then what you can do is just draw a box around it. Before you connect it, just kind of scroll through and then see, okay, it kind of zooms in on the trees a little bit, so I want to kind of include it. So I'm going to drag up, and you'll see that it basically sets a keyframe. And then go to the end. I'm going to make sure that I hit the right point, pull it up, so that way none of that at the end is being tracked. And then just kind of see how it kind of adds a keyframe, so it keeps the entire tree the whole time included. I want to bring in this bottom a little bit, so I'm just going to bring this up just a little bit here, so that way I can get more of the actual ground as tracking. More tracking points the better, but we don't want the tree because the leaves are moving, and that's going to throw us off. So now we have a pretty good mask, and now we need to check our camera tracker and see, oh no, it's only including the tree points. So when we darken the image, we see, oh, it's only in there. So the way we fix that is click on the polygon node and then click on this little invert box. Now it's going to invert that mask, and when we darken the image again, you have to check on the points there. Basically using every single point except for the points on the tree. So that's one way you can do a mask to track everything except for the tree. So we hit auto track on the track here, so that way we have all of our tracking points. Let the computer do its thing with the auto track, and then there's some options to be able to go uncheck the preview auto track, so that way you don't see double the amount, and then you can just double check and see all of our tracking points look pretty good. So I don't see anything too much of an issue there. And then the next step would then be to head over to the camera tracker on the solve option, and then what you want to do is make sure when you do the solve that it is less than like a half a pixel. So I'll click on solve. Your computer's going to be doing a bunch of math in the background. Let it do its thing, and then it's going to give you basically the solve error. Once you click on it, you can see my computer's kind of thinking right now, and then you'll see our average solve error is 0.06 pixels. Anything under 1 pixel is good. Anything under a half is great. So you can see here we got 0.06, so that means our track slides by less than a half of a pixel for the entire track. So that's a really good solve. If you have a bad solve, you can try to delete any bad tracking error points on the screen, but anything under 1 is going to be great. I can go over on how to get a better track in a different video. This is just kind of going through as fast as I can for the VFX. So next thing we want to do is we want to set our ground plane. So we have to go to export. Before we export, we got to do the 3D scene transformation, and then we have to unlock the orientation and origin by clicking on aligned. And then the next thing we want to do is set our center point. So we have to find a point that we're going to use as the center. So I'm going to use this one of these tracking points right here, as a center point. So how you do that is just kind of select one of those points on the track that is in the center, and you want to make sure that it has a low tracking error, and then it has a bunch of frames. So the frame reference time is 98 frames. So anything over, I would say like 60, 70, 80 reference frames is going to be solid. This one actually has 117, but I just want something in the middle, so I'm going to highlight that. And then for this, I'm going to set from screen selection. So that's going to be our center point when we bring in our 3D map. So that's very important that we need to set that. Next, we need to set our ground plane. So we want to include that center point, but we also want to include a bunch of other points. I would say maybe between 5 and 10 points on the ground floor. And then we're going to set that from selection as well. So this is going to be basically letting us know where the ground floor is. So we're going to set from selection for this one as well. And then we're going to go back over to the aligned section to kind of lock those values down. Very important step that we do this so we know where we are in the 3D scene before we export, and then click on export. You're going to get a bunch of these nodes popping up. This node tree is going to have a camera 3D, a merge 3D, and then a camera tracker renderer with our point cloud and our ground plane. So what we want to do here is essentially, I'm just trying to get this rearranged where I can have it kind of in the middle. I'll show you how to work with each one of these nodes. We want to look through the merge 3D. So we're going to click on this node and then press 2 on your keyboard, and it's going to bring the viewer into this node. So anytime you click on a node, you can press 2 and it'll pull it up in your viewer here. Now in our viewport, we're in the 3D space here. So you can use your control mouse, shift mouse, alt mouse to zoom in and out to kind of control around this 3D scene. We can see our tracked camera and then all the 3D points that we have tracked. So next we want to do is click on the point tracker node, and then we're going to just go to the point and then kind of lower the size to make it a little bit easier to see and deal with. So I'm just going to slide down the size a little bit so those points aren't as huge. And you can see where we tracked. We have our ground plane is what we want to work with here next. So what you'll do is click on the ground plane node. And then we want to switch to material. We're going to change that to white. And then we want to go back over to the controls tab and click on the wireframe. So now we have our ground. This is what's going to catch our shadows. So basically we're looking through the 3D camera here now. We have all the points on the ground, and we have basically like our shadow catcher. So this is going to be where the shadows in our 3D world will be caught on. The next thing that I want to do is create a reference point. So how to do a reference point, essentially I'm going to select some points that are near the center. That would be kind of where those trees are in the field. Highlight a few points. You're going to right click, and then we're going to add in an image plane. And here it's going to pull in a merge 3D and an image plane here. On the image plane, we're going to need to go to transform, and we're going to use these rotation sliders. And now you can see we're kind of rotating that square up. So this is going to be essentially just so we know where we are in 3D space. Is going to be kind of in the middle where our center is when we export it into Blender. So we know this is essentially where the tree is. This step's not needed, but it kind of helps me work in 3D space to add in that image plane to kind of know exactly where I am. So here's a look at our 3D scene inside of DaVinci's Fusion. We got our tree, our center point, our shadow catcher, and then all of our tracking points with our camera that has been tracked. So you can kind of see the camera movement, the shadow catcher, and then all the points that we have here. So what we're going to need to do next is kind of export this 3D scene as a FBX file, and then we're going to import that into Blender to then bring in our 3D asset to comp our 3D asset. We have our FBX exporter. We want it coming from the merge 3D. You get that there. Click on the FBX exporter, and then here is where you're able to browse and then basically show where you want to save that tracking FBX file. So pick a spot on your system where you're able to save that, and then you're going to come up to Fusion and click on Render All Savers. If Render All Savers is grayed out, just click on the Show Toolbar, and then it'll be able to click on this. As soon as you click on this, it's going to download it and save it on your system to where you have your file saved at. And then I'll show you how to import that in Blender on the next one, and then we'll be able to finish our comp, our render in Blender for the spaceship. One last step too, almost forgot, that we'll need is in DaVinci Resolve on the camera 3D node, we're going to need to write down the focal length that our track solved automatically for us. So this was the best focal range for our track. So again, you'll click on camera 3D. On that node, you want to write down the focal length. We need to copy that and paste that into Blender once we get into Blender. So almost forgot that step. So in DaVinci Resolve, camera 3D, and then the focal length, write that down or copy and save that number. And I'll show you what we'll do with it in the next one.